A small-town single mom, Olivia Kane, just wants to give her blind daughter Lily a safe and peaceful life. But when a ruthless biker gang starts terrorizing Lily, they have no idea they've crossed the wrong woman. Olivia isn't just a mechanic or a mom. She's an ex-Navy SEAL with a deadly skill set and a past she's kept buried for years. As the gang's threats spiral into violence, Olivia unleashes her training, turning their own tactics against them, while uncovering a criminal empire hidden in plain sight. This isn't just about survival, it's about total destruction of those who dared to threaten her family. Before we dive in, buckle up, get ready, and hit subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. The early morning sun filtered through the curtains of Olivia Kane's modest home, casting a soft glow on the living room, where her daughter, Lily, sat at the dining table with her hands moving deftly over a braille book. Olivia watched her from the kitchen, flipping pancakes on a skillet while sipping black coffee. This was their routine, a quiet life in a quiet town. It was the kind of peace Olivia had always hoped for after her years of service. But peace, she knew, never lasted long. "Smells good," Lily said, her head turning toward the sound of the spatula scraping the pan. She had a small, determined smile that always struck Olivia as both inspiring and heartbreaking. At 17, Lily had a sharp wit and an unshakable independence, refusing to let her blindness define her. Olivia walked over, setting a plate in front of her daughter. "Eat up. Big day ahead." "Big day?" Lily asked, raising an eyebrow as she poked at the pancake with her fork. "You've got that braille tutoring session at the library," Olivia reminded her. "And don't think I didn't notice you sneaking more poetry books into your bag," Lily smirked. Guilty. It was a normal morning, but the atmosphere in town was anything but. The Black Vulture's motorcycle gang had rolled in the day before, their roaring engines breaking the small town's usual calm. By the time Olivia drove Lily to the library, the gang's presence was already obvious. The street seemed quieter, the usual chatter of shopkeepers replaced by furtive glances toward the rumbling bikes parked outside the diner. As Olivia pulled up in front of the library, she spotted the gang leader, Carter Grimm Malone, standing with his crew on the diner's patio. Tattoos snaked up his arms, and his ice-blue eyes scanned the street like a predator sizing up his territory. Olivia felt the familiar tightening in her chest, a warning. "Call me if you need anything," she told Lily as she helped her out of the truck. "I'll be fine, Mom," Lily said, her confidence unwavering as she tapped her cane along the sidewalk. Olivia watched her disappear into the library before turning her gaze back to the gang. Inside the diner, Lily unknowingly became the center of attention. One of the bikers, a wiry man named Stitch, sneered as he watched her sit at the counter. "Blind and brave," he muttered. "Cute." Lily ignored him, her fingers brushing over a menu in braille. "You think you're better than us?" Stitch asked, leaning in close. "I don't think about you at all," Lily replied calmly. The diner fell silent as Stitch's face twisted in humiliation. Before he could lash out, the owner, a burly man named Tom, barked, "Back off, Stitch, or you're out." The gang left soon after, but not before Stitch glared at Lily and spat on the ground near her feet. As Olivia returned to pick her up, she noticed the tension in the air. Lily didn't mention the encounter, but Olivia didn't need her to. Her instincts screamed that trouble was brewing. That night, Olivia stood in the doorway of her garage, the faint scent of oil and rubber filling the air as she stared at the dusty tarp covering her workbench. It had been years since she'd touched the items hidden beneath it, but an uneasy feeling in her gut told her she might need them soon. She didn't know the Black Vultures personally, but she knew their type, arrogant, dangerous, and desperate to prove their dominance. Her time in the Navy had taught her to recognize threats, and everything about the gang screamed that they weren't just passing through. Lily, oblivious to her mother's unease, had gone to bed early, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts. She forced herself to shake off the tension, closing the garage door and heading inside. Whatever the gang had planned, she told herself, it was better to deal with it in the morning. But the morning brought worse news. "Mom!" Lily's voice rang out from the front yard as Olivia came down the stairs. She rushed outside to find Lily standing beside their truck, her cane tapping at the ground near the passenger side. The tires had been slashed, the body keyed with jagged lines that spelled out a crude warning, "Leave." Olivia's stomach churned with anger. She put a hand on Lily's shoulder. "Go back inside," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'll handle this." Lily hesitated, sensing the tension in her mother's tone, but nodded and went inside. As soon as she was gone, Olivia knelt by the tires, inspecting the damage. This wasn't random. It was a message, a deliberate attempt to intimidate her and Lily. By mid-morning, word of the vandalism had spread. Neighbors offered their sympathies, but there was little they could do. Most of the town had learned to keep their heads down when it came to gangs like the Black Vultures. At the local diner, Olivia overheard conversations about the gang's growing aggression. Business owners whispered about extortion demands and subtle threats. Later that day, Olivia decided to confront the gang directly. She walked into the diner, where they'd made themselves at home, her presence drawing stares from the patrons and the bikers alike. Carter Grim Malone looked up from his booth, a slow smirk spreading across his face as Olivia approached. "You the one with the blind kid?" he asked, leaning back casually. "I'm the one with the slashed tires," Olivia replied coldly. "Tell your men to back off," Carter chuckled, glancing around at his crew. "Lady, you've got guts, I'll give you that. But this isn't your fight. Just stay out of our way and no one gets hurt." Olivia held his gaze, her jaw tightening. "I'm not asking." For a moment, the air seemed to crackle with tension. Then Carter leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You should walk away while you still can. People who stand up to us don't last long." Olivia left without another word, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. The sound of Lily's cane tapping on the pavement echoed down the quiet street as she made her way home from the library. The day had been uneventful, or so it seemed, and she felt confident walking her usual route. She prided herself on her independence, relying on her keen hearing and memory to navigate the small town. But today, something felt off the usual. Chatter of neighbors and children playing was absent, replaced by an unsettling silence. The low growl of motorcycle engines broke the stillness. Lily slowed her pace, her grip tightening on her cane as the sound grew louder. A sudden shout startled her. "Hey, blind girl!" The voice came from across the street. Lily turned her head in its direction, her expression calm despite the anxiety building in her chest. She heard footsteps, several of them approaching. "You got a lot of nerve, don't you?" Another voice sneered, closer this time. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lily replied evenly, keeping her head high. "You embarrassed one of our guys at the diner?" the first voice said, his tone dripping with mockery. "We don't like that." Lily took a deep breath, holding her ground. "If you don't like being embarrassed, maybe don't act like bullies in public." The group of men erupted in jeers and laughter, but there was an edge to it that made Lily's heart race. She could sense them closing in, their presence oppressive. "Smart mouth," one of them muttered. "Let's see how smart you are without that cane." Before she could react, someone grabbed the cane and yanked it out of her hands. Lily stumbled, her balance momentarily thrown off. She clenched her fists, determined not to show fear. "Give it back," she demanded, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "Make me," the man taunted. The growl of another engine cut through the tension, louder and closer than the others. The bikers paused as a truck screeched to a halt nearby. The driver's door flew open and heavy boots hit the pavement. "Get away from her!" Olivia's voice carried a command that froze the men in their tracks. She stormed toward them, her eyes blazing with fury. One of the bikers, emboldened by the numbers on his side, stepped forward to intercept her. "You're the mom?" he said with a smirk. Big mistake coming here. Olivia didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm, twisting it in one fluid motion that sent him crashing to the ground with a yelp of pain. The other men hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. "Anyone else want to try?" Olivia growled, her stance daring them to take her on. The gang muttered curses under their breath as they backed off. One tossed Lily's cane to the ground before retreating. Olivia retrieved it, her hand shaking slightly as she handed it back to Lily. "Let's go," Olivia said, her voice firm but soft. As they walked home, Olivia's mind raced. The gang's brazenness confirmed her fears. They weren't going to stop. She glanced at Lily, who clutched her cane tightly but walked with her head high. Olivia's resolve hardened. If the black vultures wanted a fight, she would give them one. The smell of smoke hit Olivia before she saw the flames. She stood frozen for a split second in her driveway, the bright orange glow reflecting off the glass of her truck's windows. Her house was on fire. The inferno roared, devouring everything in its path, and Olivia's chest tightened as she realized how close it was to the living room where Lily had been minutes earlier. "Lily!" she shouted, sprinting toward the front door. She burst through the thick smoke, her heart pounding. As she scanned the room, "Here!" Lily's voice called from the back of the house, steady but laced with urgency. Olivia ran to her, finding her crouched low near the back door, holding a damp cloth to her face. "Are you hurt?" Olivia asked, kneeling beside her. "No, I heard something break, and then I smelled the smoke. I didn't know what to do," Lily said, her voice trembling now. "You did great. We're getting out, now." Olivia pulled Lily to her feet and led her outside, coughing as the thick smoke clawed at her lungs. Once they were safely across the street, she turned back to watch the house collapse further into the fire. The fire department arrived moments later, dousing the blaze as neighbors gathered, murmuring in hushed tones. Olivia stood with an arm around Lily, her jaw clenched as the reality of the situation sank in. This wasn't an accident. This was a message, loud and clear. A sheriff's deputy approached them, his face grim. "We'll investigate, Ms. Kane, but if this was arson..." "It was," Olivia interrupted, her voice cold. "I know who did it." The deputy hesitated, sensing the anger radiating off her. "Do you want to press charges?" "I want them gone," Olivia replied flatly, her gaze fixed on the smoldering ruins of her home. With nowhere else to go, Olivia and Lily drove to a remote cabin owned by Marcus, a fellow SEAL who had been off the grid since his discharge. Marcus greeted them at the door, his expression hardening as he took in the soot on Olivia's face and the exhaustion in Lily's posture. "What happened?" he asked, ushering them inside. "Bikers," Olivia said shortly, sitting Lily down. "On the couch. They're targeting us. They torched the house." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You sure you want to stick around for this fight?" "I'm not running," Olivia said firmly. "Not from them." Marcus nodded. "Then we'd better get ready." The next morning, Olivia and Marcus set to work. Marcus helped Lily settle in, distracting her with small tasks to keep her mind off the trauma, while Olivia prepared the cabin for what she knew would come next. She set traps around the perimeter, rigged makeshift alarms and stockpiled supplies. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. The black vultures had made it personal, and Olivia wasn't about to let them win. For the first time in years, she let herself slip back into the mindset of a soldier. If they wanted a war, she'd bring them one. The cabin, tucked deep in the woods, was the perfect stronghold for what Olivia knew was coming. She moved through it methodically, securing windows with reinforced bars and setting up makeshift barriers at key entry points. Outside, Marcus worked on the perimeter, setting tripwires and digging shallow trenches to funnel any attackers into kill zones. Lily, though unsettled by the tension, did her best to help. Olivia had taught her how to organize and prepare, and though she wasn't told the full extent of what was happening, Lily could sense that this wasn't just a precaution. It was preparation for battle. At dusk, Olivia sat at the small kitchen table with Marcus, poring over a crude map of the town and surrounding areas. Her hands moved swiftly as she sketched out the gang's known locations based on the limited intel she'd gathered. "Their main base is on the west side of town, an old junkyard," Olivia said, her voice low and focused. "But I've seen smaller groups near the diner and the industrial park. They're spreading out, probably getting ready to consolidate their hold." Marcus nodded, tracing a finger over the map. "They're bold. Most gangs don't pull this kind of thing unless they're confident no one will stop them. What makes them so fearless?" "Leverage," Olivia replied. "I think they're backed by something bigger. A syndicate, maybe. They're too organized for a random gang." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. If that's true, you're not just dealing with bikers, you're dealing with something way worse. I know, Olivia said, her voice hardening. But right now, the bikers are the immediate threat. If we can take them out, we can figure out who's pulling the strings. As night fell, Olivia decided it was time to gather more intel. Leaving Lily under Marcus's protection, she ventured into town, moving like a shadow through the back alleys and quiet streets. She approached the junkyard cautiously, using the cover of darkness to slip past the makeshift gate. Inside, the scene confirmed her suspicions. The gang wasn't just a bunch of petty criminals, they were stockpiling weapons, drugs, and cash. Several of the gang members sat around a fire pit, drinking and laughing, while a few others unloaded crates from a truck bearing the logo of a logistics company Olivia didn't recognize. She pulled out her phone and snapped a few photos, focusing on the license plates and the gang members' faces. As she moved closer, she overheard a heated conversation between Carter Grim Malone and another man she didn't recognize. "The boss wants results," the stranger said sharply. "This town was supposed to be easy, clean, no complications," Carter sneered. "We've got it under control, just a matter of time before the Kane woman folds. She's tough, but they all break eventually." Olivia's jaw tightened. She slipped away as quietly as she'd come, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and determination. They didn't know who they were dealing with, but they would soon. Olivia stood at the edge of the cabin's property, her breath fogging in the crisp morning air as she surveyed the traps and defenses she and Marcus had set up. Tripwires lined the tree line, and hidden trenches with sharp stakes ensured that no one could approach unnoticed. But she knew defenses alone wouldn't win this fight. She needed to strike first. Back inside, Olivia laid out her plan to Marcus. "We hit their supply trucks," she said, pointing to the photos she'd taken at the junkyard. "That logistics company is a front. They're moving weapons, drugs, and cash through those shipments. If we cut off their resources, we force them to react." Marcus leaned forward, studying the images. "You're talking about sabotage," he said with a faint grin. "I didn't think you had it in you anymore." Olivia gave him a wry smile. "I never lost it, just buried it." The two spent the next few hours preparing. Olivia packed a small kit with tools, wire cutters, and explosives she had improvised from household items. She reviewed the layout of the junkyard again, memorizing every detail. Marcus, still nursing the injuries he'd sustained during the gang's earlier assault, insisted on joining her. "Stay here," Olivia said firmly. "Lily needs someone to protect her if this goes sideways." Marcus reluctantly agreed, though. His expression told her he wasn't happy about it. That night, Olivia slipped out of the cabin under cover of darkness, her steps silent and deliberate. The junkyard was quiet, save for the hum of a generator and the occasional bark of a dog in the distance. She moved quickly, staying low as she approached the supply trucks. She began with the smaller truck, cutting the fuel line and letting the gasoline drip into the dirt. Then she moved to the larger vehicle, planting a timed explosive underneath the chassis. She worked with precision, her years of training guiding her hands. As she finished, she heard footsteps approaching. Ducking behind a stack of tires, she watched as two gang members strolled past, smoking and chatting. "I'm telling you, this Kane woman's going to fold," one of them said. The other laughed. "Maybe, but if she doesn't, Grim will take care of it. He always does." They moved on, oblivious to her presence. Olivia waited until their voices faded, then slipped back out of the junkyard. The explosion came an hour later. Olivia and Marcus, listening from the cabin, heard the distant rumble and saw the faint glow on the horizon. She allowed herself a brief smile of satisfaction. The next morning, the gang was in chaos. Olivia listened to a police scanner she'd tapped into, picking up fragments of their communication. Carter was furious, accusing his men of incompetence. But Olivia wasn't done. She knew the gang would retaliate, and when they did, they'd play right into her hands. For now, she let them stew, knowing the destruction she'd left behind was only the beginning. The attack came just before dawn, as Olivia had predicted. She stood at the cabin's window, watching the distant flicker of headlights weaving through the trees. The black vultures weren't subtle. They wanted her to know they were coming. The roar of motorcycles and the crunch of tires on gravel grew louder, breaking the stillness of the early morning. "They're here," Olivia said, her voice calm but firm. Marcus stood beside her, a hunting rifle cradled in his arms. Despite his injuries, he looked ready. "You sure about this?" he asked, glancing at her. Olivia nodded. "We've done the work. Let them come." She turned to Lily, who sat quietly at the kitchen table, her face pale but composed. "Lily, you remember what we talked about?" Lily nodded, gripping the small handheld radio Olivia had given her. "If anything happens, I stay low, wait for the signal, and head to the bunker." "Good," Olivia said, squeezing her shoulder. "Stay safe. I'll come for you." The first tripwire went off with a sharp crack, followed by a panicked shout. Olivia smirked, moving to her position near the front door. The gang had underestimated her, as she'd hoped. Outside, chaos erupted as several bikers fell into the traps Marcus had set. A trench filled with sharpened stakes had caught one of the gang's SUVs, its front tires shredded. Gunfire rang out as the men tried to regroup, shouting orders over the din. "Push forward! It's just one woman!" Carter's voice roared over the commotion. Olivia used the distraction to her advantage. She moved through the shadows, her movements precise and deadly. With a silenced pistol in hand, she picked off two of the bikers. Flanking the cabin, their bodies crumpling silently into the dirt. Marcus, stationed in the upstairs loft, fired shots at the advancing gang members, keeping them pinned down. Despite his injuries, his aim was steady, and his rounds found their marks. "Grimm's coming up the middle," Marcus called out. Olivia darted to the back of the cabin, where she'd set up a secondary line of traps. Sure enough, Carter was leading a small group through the tree line, trying to flank them. She waited until they were in the kill zone before triggering a remote device. The explosion rocked the forest, sending dirt and debris flying. Two of Carter's men went down immediately, but Carter himself emerged from the smoke, bloodied but alive. "You think this is over?" he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. "I'm coming for you, Kane." Olivia didn't respond. Instead, she stepped into his path, her knife glinting in the faint light. Carter charged, swinging wildly, but Olivia was faster. She dodged his strikes with practiced precision, delivering sharp, calculated blows that left him staggering. Before she could finish him off, a scream pierced the air. Olivia's blood ran cold as she turned to see one of the bikers dragging Lily out of the cabin, holding a knife to her throat. "Drop it or she dies," the man shouted. Carter grinned through bloodied teeth. "Looks like we've got the upper hand now." Olivia froze, her heart pounding as she calculated her next move. For the first time, the fight wasn't just about her. It was about Lily. The world seemed to narrow as Olivia locked eyes with the biker holding Lily. He was young, barely out of his 20s, but the trembling knife in his hand didn't make him any less dangerous. Lily stood rigid, her hands clenched, into fists at her sides, her face pale but defiant. "Let her go," Olivia said, her voice cold and steady. The biker shook his head, his grip tightening on Lily's arm. "You move, she dies. Think carefully," Olivia replied, her eyes never leaving his. "You think Carter's gonna protect you after this? You think you're walking out of here alive if you hurt her?" Carter, still recovering from their fight, sneered as he staggered to his feet. "You don't make the rules here, Kane. You've lost." Olivia didn't answer. Her mind raced as she calculated the angles, her hand hovering near her knife. She needed to act fast, but any sudden move could endanger Lily. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, her voice cutting through the tension. "Do what you have to." Olivia's chest tightened at her daughter's bravery, but it was the break she needed. Without hesitation, she lunged forward, hurling her knife with pinpoint accuracy. The blade struck the biker's arm, causing him to cry out and drop the knife. Lily ducked instinctively, twisting out of his grasp and falling to the ground. Olivia was on him in an instant, her fists slamming into his face with unrelenting force until he lay unconscious. "Lily!" Olivia turned and helped her daughter to her feet, checking her over for injuries. "I'm fine." Lily said breathlessly. What about the others? Carter, watching the scene unfold, snarled and bolted toward the forest. Fall back, he shouted to his remaining men. This isn't over. Olivia grabbed a fallen pistol and fired a warning shot into the air, stopping the retreating gang in their tracks. It is over, she shouted, her voice ringing with authority. You come back here. You'll wish you hadn't. The gang hesitated, their confidence shaken. Carter glared at Olivia but didn't press his luck. You'll regret this, Kane, he growled before disappearing into the shadows with his men. The forest fell silent, the only sounds the crackle of burning. Debris and Olivia's heavy breathing. She turned to Marcus, who limped out of the cabin, rifle in hand. Is it done? He asked, scanning the tree line. For now, Olivia replied, her voice grim. They returned to the cabin, where Olivia barricaded the doors and checked on Lily. Again, the girl was shaken but steady, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if to ground herself. I'm sorry, Lily whispered. I wasn't fast enough. You were perfect, Olivia said, kneeling in front of her. You were brave. You gave me the chance I needed. Don't ever think you did anything wrong. Lily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Olivia pulled her into a tight embrace, silently, vowing that no one would ever threaten her daughter again. But as the night wore on, Olivia's thoughts drifted to Carter's parting words. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The factory loomed in the distance, its rusted walls and broken windows casting jagged shadows under the pale moonlight. Olivia crouched in the bushes on the outskirts of the property, her breath steady as she surveyed the gang's stronghold. The Black Vultures had retreated here after the failed assault on the cabin, regrouping and nursing their wounds. Olivia knew this was her best and possibly only chance to finish them off for good. Her plan was simple: slip in, dismantle their leadership, and retrieve the information she needed to expose the larger syndicate backing them. But simplicity didn't mean it would be easy. She adjusted the straps of her gear and checked her weapons. 2 knives, a silenced pistol, and a small set of explosives she'd cobbled together back at the cabin. Slipping through a gap in the chain-link fence, Olivia moved silently across the factory yard. The air was thick with the acrid smell of oil and decay, masking her approach as she crept toward the main building. She paused near a stack of shipping containers, her sharp eyes picking out the figures of 2 guards standing near the entrance. With practiced precision, Olivia approached the first guard from behind, covering his mouth with one hand while driving her knife into his side with the other. She lowered him to the ground silently before moving to the second guard. He barely had time to register her presence before she struck, the butt of her pistol cracking against his skull. Inside the factory, the noise of machinery and shouting voices created a chaotic backdrop. Olivia kept to the shadows, moving methodically through the labyrinth of hallways and catwalks. She passed crates of drugs and weapons, confirming her suspicion that the Black Vultures were more than just a small-town gang. This was an operation, organized, funded, and far-reaching. As she approached the main office on the second floor, she heard Carter's voice, loud and angry. "I don't care what the boss says," he snarled. "We don't back down. We finish this and we take Kane out ourselves." Another voice responded, calmer but firm. "You're not thinking straight, Carter. If you push too hard, you'll bring the syndicate down on us." Carter slammed something, a bottle, Olivia guessed, against the desk. "I don't care. We can't let her win. She's just one woman." Olivia smirked to herself. He was wrong. She moved into position, planting one of her explosives near the room's support beams. The device wasn't powerful enough to take down the building, but would create enough chaos to give her the upper hand. Satisfied, Olivia slipped into the office's adjoining storage room, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Seconds later, the explosion ripped through the factory, shaking the walls and plunging the building into chaos. Alarms blared, and Carter's men shouted orders as they scrambled to assess the damage. Olivia moved quickly, kicking open the office door and taking out the 2 men flanking Carter before they could react. Carter spun around, his eyes wide with shock. "You," he spat. "Me," Olivia replied, leveling her pistol at him. "Let's talk." Carter's eyes darted to the gun in Olivia's hand, then to the bodies of his men crumpled on the floor. His chest heaved as he weighed his options. But Olivia knew he wasn't going to give up easily. His reputation, his pride, and whatever twisted code he followed wouldn't allow it. "You've got guts showing up here," Carter said, his voice venomous but edged with unease. "But you're out of your depth. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Olivia stepped closer, her gun trained on him. "Then educate me. Who's pulling your strings, Carter? Who's behind all of this?" He let out a bitter laugh. "You think you can just waltz in here and take us down? The syndicate will bury you. They'll burn this whole town to the ground if it means protecting their operation." "Let them try," Olivia said coldly. "But first, I'm dismantling you." Before he could respond, Carter lunged forward, his hand grabbing a knife from the desk. Olivia sidestepped his attack, slamming the butt of her pistol into his temple. He stumbled, but recovered quickly, swinging, the blade in a wide arc. The office was cramped, leaving little room to maneuver, but Olivia's training took over. She dodged his wild swings with precision, waiting for an opening. When it came, she struck, disarming him with a sharp twist of his wrist before driving her elbow into his chest. Carter fell to the ground, gasping for air, as Olivia pressed her, boot against his chest, pinning him in place. "Who's running this operation?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. He glared up at her, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think I'm afraid of you? You're nothing compared to them." Olivia knelt down, her face inches from his. "Maybe not, but I'm here right now and you're bleeding on the floor. Tell me what I need to know, or I'll make sure you don't get the chance to regret it." For a moment, she thought he wouldn't break. But then, with a pained grunt, he spat out the words. "They're running it out of Ridgepoint Logistics. It's a front. Drugs, weapons, everything flows through there. The boss, he's untouchable." Olivia's mind raced. Ridgepoint Logistics was the name she'd seen on the truck at the junkyard. Carter wasn't lying, or if he was, it was close enough to the truth to matter. She stood, keeping her gun trained on him. "If I see you again, you won't get a second chance," she said. Carter glared at her, but didn't move as she backed toward the door. She slipped out, the chaos in the factory still covering her escape. By the time she returned to the cabin, Marcus was waiting, his expression tense. "Well?" he asked. "Ridgepoint Logistics," Olivia said. "We've got our target." Marcus nodded grimly. "Then it's time to bring this whole thing down." The streets of the town were eerily quiet as Olivia parked her truck a block away from Ridgepoint Logistics. The industrial complex loomed in the distance, a fortress of steel and concrete surrounded by chain-link fences and patrolled by armed guards. It was a stark reminder of the scale of the operation she was about to take on. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, loading the last of the magazines for his rifle. His injuries still slowed him, but his resolve was ironclad. "You ready for this?" he asked, glancing at Olivia. "I've been ready since they came after Lily," Olivia replied, her voice steady. The two moved quickly and quietly toward the complex, slipping through a gap in the fence Olivia had scouted. The guards were numerous, but their movements were predictable, following a pattern she'd memorized during her surveillance. She and Marcus separated, each taking a different approach to their targets. Olivia's objective was clear: get to the control room, disable the security systems, and kill the federal agents she had tipped off earlier. The evidence she'd collected from the junkyard and Carter's confession had been enough to pull in higher authorities, but Olivia had insisted on leading the charge herself. She didn't trust anyone else to finish what she'd started. As she made her way through the complex, she moved with the precision of a predator, dispatching guards with silent efficiency. She avoided unnecessary confrontations, conserving her energy for the inevitable showdown. Every step brought her closer to the control room, her senses heightened and her mind laser-focused. Meanwhile, Marcus created a diversion, planting explosives near the facility's fuel tanks and supply depots. His actions drew the guards, attention forcing them to scatter as alarms blared throughout the complex. Olivia used the chaos to her advantage, slipping into the control room unnoticed. Inside, she found rows of monitors displaying live feeds from the security cameras. The screens showed the guards scrambling to respond to the explosions, their coordination falling apart under the pressure. Olivia quickly disabled the cameras and locked down the exterior gates, trapping the remaining personnel inside. With the security systems down, Olivia activated the signal beacon, alerting the federal agents stationed just outside the town. She could only hope they'd arrive in time to cut off any chance of escape. As she finished, the door behind her burst open and 2 syndicate enforcers stormed in, guns drawn. Olivia dove for cover, firing back with controlled precision. The confined space of the control room turned the fight into a brutal close-quarters battle. By the time the dust settled, Olivia stood victorious, blood trickling from a shallow cut on her arm. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Marcus limping into the room. "Guards are thinning out," he said, breathing heavily. "Explosives are set. How are we looking here?" "Good enough," Olivia replied. "Let's fix this." As they exited the control room, the distant sound of sirens grew louder, signaling the arrival of reinforcements. Olivia and Marcus exchanged a glance, knowing the endgame was finally here. The wail of sirens echoed through the industrial complex, mingling with the chaotic shouts of the guards scrambling to regroup. Olivia and Marcus moved swiftly through the labyrinth of corridors, avoiding remaining pockets of resistance as they headed toward the heart of Ridgepoint Logistics. The explosives Marcus had planted earlier were set to detonate within minutes, ensuring the facility's destruction and crippling the syndicate's local operations. Olivia stopped briefly to check her watch. "We've got 3 minutes before this place goes up," she said, glancing at Marcus. "Plenty of time," he replied with a grim smile, though his limp betrayed the toll the night had taken on him. As they reached the main warehouse, Olivia spotted a group of syndicate enforcers attempting to load crates of weapons into a van. She raised her rifle and fired, the shots precise and deadly. The guards fell one by one as Marcus provided cover fire. "Clear," Marcus called, scanning the area. Olivia approached the van, yanking open the driver's side door. Inside, she found a tablet loaded with logistical data, shipping routes, drop points, and the names of key players within the syndicate. She grabbed it, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "This is the leverage we need," she said, holding up the tablet. Marcus nodded, but his expression darkened as he pointed toward the far end of the warehouse. Carter Grim Malone stood there, flanked by 2 of his men, a shotgun slung over his shoulder. "You think you've won?" Carter sneered, stepping forward. "You think blowing up one building is going to stop us?" Olivia leveled her rifle at him. "This isn't just one building, it's your entire operation." Carter laughed, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're out of time, Kane. You can't stop what's coming." Before he could raise his weapon, Olivia fired, taking down the 2 men beside him. Carter dove for cover behind a stack of crates, firing blindly in her direction. Olivia and Marcus split up, flanking him from both sides. The final confrontation was brutal. Carter fought like a cornered animal, his shotgun blasts tearing through the crates as Olivia closed in. When his weapon jammed, Olivia seized the opportunity, tackling him to the ground. The 2 grappled fists and elbows, connecting with bone-crunching force. Carter's strength was formidable, but Olivia's training and determination proved superior. With a final devastating blow, she knocked him unconscious, his body slumping to the floor. The distant sound of explosions signaled that Marcus's charges had detonated. Fire and smoke engulfed the facility as the 2 hurried outside, Carter's unconscious body slung over Marcus's shoulder. Outside, federal agents swarmed the complex, detaining the remaining guards and securing the scene. Olivia handed the tablet to the lead agent, her expression unreadable. "You've got everything you need to take them down," she said. The agent nodded. "And you?" "I'm done," Olivia replied. "It's time to go home." Later, back at the cabin, Olivia embraced Lily tightly, the weight of the battle finally lifting. The syndicate had been crippled, the Black Vultures dismantled. For the first time in weeks, their future felt secure. But as Olivia watched the sunrise from the porch, her hand instinctively brushed the scars on her knuckles. She knew the fight wasn't over. Not completely. And when the next battle came, she'd be ready.